I've really noticed in working with financial advisors is they struggle with making that pivot from that informative piece of their talk into the persuasive piece of their talk. And then they fail to close. So one of the things we worked on within your institution and organization is, all right, how are you going to focus that last 3 to 5 minutes into the conversion piece? And what does that look like?
This is the Business of Advice podcast, where we help good advisors become great business owners. I am really looking forward to our guest today. It's someone that I know. Terri Sjodin is the principal and founder of Sjodin Communications. With over 30 years of helping people give great presentations, she has helped leaders and salespeople find ways to connect with clients and prospects in real and meaningful ways. She is the author of a New York Times bestselling book, Small Message, Big Impact, and has a new book coming out very soon titled Presentation Ready, which is a guide to understanding the 12 most common sales presentation mistakes and how to avoid them. We're going to talk about that a lot today. Terri, good to see you again. Welcome to the Business of Advice podcast.
Good morning, Cody. Thank you for having me. I'm excited.
So I said, I know you well. You have spoken at our Inspiring Women event here at Advisors Excel, which is our top female financial advisors when they come together, but also have led some smaller groups, training events here for not only some of our key people here at Advisors Excel, but also our advisors. So I know you pretty well, and I know your work pretty well, and we're going to dive into it. But for those of you who don't know you, or even here at Advisors Excel who haven't heard you yet, maybe walk us through just your journey of becoming a New York Times bestselling author, but really just this passion around communicating with people when it comes to sales and their presentation ability.
Sure. Well, thank you again for having me. This is my passion. I've been a full-time professional speaker and trainer in this area for over 30 years. Originally, I was a speech geek. I competed in speech and debate in high school and in college, so this has always been a passion of mine. And I found early on when I was a sales rep that there was a direct correlation between my success in the field and my ability to drive conversion that was directly related to what I learned as a debater. And so I just personally started applying debate strategy in all of my presentations, where they were one-on-one, small group, or large group, and it worked for me. And so ultimately what happened was, at the time, my sales manager asked me to start helping some of the other people on our team. And then I split off and created my own company, Sjodin Communications, with one goal in mind, and that was to help other people, whether they sell a product or a service or a cause, helping them to build more polished and persuasive presentations using debate strategy, because it helped people to become much more persuasive rather than just informative without being hard sell. And that just seemed to hit a nerve with people. So it's been fun.
Here's the testament I give all the time. We had you speak as, like, let's say, as a keynote speaker, but then coming out of that, a lot of the people at that event are like, we need more of Terri. And so we brought you in. You've done like a 2-day workshop where you're really diving in deep, and those are some of the things we're going to talk about today, just because I know people have left here with just a ton of great skills. But let's start with, we're going to talk about the idea of sales presentations, and sometimes, and you're speaking primarily to financial advisors, and a lot of our advisors are doing big presentations, right? So they're doing a seminar or a lunch and learn or educational workshop where they're in front of 30, 40, 50 people. I know a lot of times we think about presentations in that sense, but a lot of your work is also like the one-on-one presentation also when you're sitting. So maybe just a level set, like when you talk about, and we'll dig into some of the mistakes that people are making, can you just set the stage more for what you think about when you think about sales presentations?
Yeah, so because I'm in sales, I really care about the research and the background that's been done before I give advice to people. So I think the easiest place to kind of talk about this particular time in the world and how this book is helpful goes to the research project that is underpinning each of these 12 mistakes. So I did a 3-phase, multi-year research study in cooperation with San Diego State University. I worked with 2 PhDs and some of their graduate students to ask a really important question. And that is, okay, look, does making a sales presentation mistake matter, whether you're one-on-one, small group, or large group? And overwhelmingly, the answer was yes. And so we said, okay, well, if that's the case, then what are you doing? Like, what are the mistakes that are happening that you feel cost you the win or the deal or the opportunity? And ultimately, we curated this really tight, clean list of 12 mistakes that universally people self-identified. And it didn't matter if what their generation they were from, how many years of experience they had, it didn't matter what their gender was. And what was fascinating is that these 12 mistakes just kept coming up in various patterns. And depending on the group, there might be some areas that were stronger or more dominant, some mistakes that were more frequent than others. But then, whoo, the top three were always the top three. So it's been
Well,
really interesting ride.
we probably don't have time to get into all 12, and they should just buy your book, and that's an easy way to read through them. But let's start with, because what you were helping our advisors when you did the workshops was their presentation that they're going to do on a stage in front of a big group of people. So let's start there, and we'll talk about a couple different types of sales presentations. But that's one. You're in front of 40, 50 people that you're hoping to convince to come into your office and explore the idea of becoming one of your clients. That's just position it that way. I think there were two of the mistakes that were kind of tied that we saw when you were in here. Mistake number one, which is winging it. You kind of wing it. You're not overly prepared. You don't have it. I think the second one that was a pretty big one, probably a big mistake for a lot of financial advisors, is being overly informative versus persuasive. Those were kind of the two that were tied-ish, I guess you would say, when we polled the people here. Do you just maybe using those two mistakes as a jumping off point, you want to talk about what you see in those two areas most often?
No, I really appreciate the scenario setup as well, because that's where this applies. So it's challenging on a lunch and learn situation or when you're leading a seminar, because you feel like your responsibility is to be informative. You feel like everybody's gathered so that you can share information about who you are and what you do and why you should be their advisor. And that's partially why people tend to lean into being overly informative.
Yep.
The other burden is that you have to drive that conversion at the end. And so one of the things I've really noticed in working with the financial advisors is they struggle with making that pivot from that informative piece of their talk into the persuasive piece of their talk. And then they fail to close. So one of the things we worked on within your institution and organization is, all right, how are you going to focus that last 3 to 5 minutes into the conversion piece, and what does that look like? And so helping people to say, wow, that what a lot of people are saying is, oh my gosh, I've kind of left that piece out, or maybe I was a concluder versus a closer, which is a third mistake. Many people conclude, but they don't close. They don't have that specific action step. So each of those three pieces, you cannot wing it. Obviously, there is a persuasive track that you can follow to structure your presentation, which makes it tighter. Then, of course, we want to make sure we're leaning into being persuasive versus informative. What are your most compelling arguments? And then identify what is your close, what is your call to action as a result, and spending some quality time working on that last 3 to 5 minutes, which is what we did. And I think the fun part is, like, I'm not there to beat people up or make them feel bad. I want them to feel excited and empowered. And I feel like that's how they left. They're like, oh my gosh, I wonder how much money I've left on the table. Like, I'm so mad. So I think that's the fun part.
Can you speak to that last part a little? I think what I see with a lot of advisors, and just, this is an area we've invested and spent a lot of time over the years with the advisors we support, but there's almost this psychology behind they don't want to come across as like they're trying to sell. But I mean, that's why they're doing this, right? Your goal is, and I think one of the things we tell them all the time is, like, if you believe you can help these people, like, you would do everything you can to get them to come in and become a client, right? Is there any tips you have around that? Just one, maybe some languaging that works really well, but then also just from a psychology standpoint, how they have to think about that conversion or that close at the end.
Yeah, well, I think it has a lot to do with your delivery. And that's where I think this relationship between public speaking and persuasive presentation skills really makes a difference. Initially, most people don't identify themselves as public speakers when they're working in the financial services industry. But in fact, you are. About 80% of your time is spent verbally communicating.
Yeah.
And so when you think about that, it's just not an area where it's not a throwaway. It's a really important skill set. And so how that applies to your question, Cody, is that the way you land a line makes a difference. The way you say something makes a difference. Sometimes people say, "Can you give me a closing technique?" And I'm like, be authentically you and speak in your voice in a clean, concise, and compelling manner, and you'll be able to drive people towards conversion. We don't want somebody who's going to be hard sell, but we do want to know that there's a logical, persuasive reason why we should buy into their case, right, or your case, what the creative elements are that make you different from someone else. And then, did you authentically speak to me? Like, are you in your own authentic voice? And so that, that opens up a whole nother chapter of conversation, but it's the way you story tell, but it's also the way that you employ your facts, your evidence, your data, your talking points, and how you pair your storytelling with your data so that it's balanced and makes sense. And then, it gets kept back to the finishing touch, which is your delivery skills. And I think that it's in that mix, which is not an easy answer, but it's in that mix that we find our own voice. And then that's how you drive that connection that helps people to feel like, oh yeah, I like that person. I connect with that person. I respect that person. And therefore I feel comfortable moving forward.
Are there any thoughts you have for an advisor? Because a lot of our advisors are doing presentations all the time, right? Especially in front of groups, like, maybe up to 4 to 5 a month. Sometimes, and this may get back a little bit to that first topic of winging it. It's not so much that they're winging it, but I say sometimes they're like a wind-up doll, right? You could just pull it, and it's the same thing. Any tips for someone who is doing a lot of presentations, who may think they're good but hasn't really critically looked at their presentation? Just any thoughts you would have around that, on how they can improve that?
Nailed it. Is how do you critically look at that presentation? That's really where it begins. And it also has a lot to do with how much time you have. Winston Churchill was noted for saying, if you want me to speak for 3 minutes, it'll take me a month to prepare. If you want me to speak for 10 minutes, it'll take me about 2 weeks to prepare. But if you want me to speak for an hour, I'm ready right now, right?
Yep.
Because it's easy to do a longer talk. We just kind of roll in hot and we're like, oh, I've been doing this a long time and it's not that big of a deal. But the key right now in this market is brevity is your friend. So my first critical kind of awareness moment would be, do you really need to take as much time as you're taking to share that message, or could you do it in a way that's tighter? And then once you've decided, okay, I'm going to shrink the amount of time that I'm going to be presenting, how do you balance that time in a way that helps you to communicate what you want to say, but does it in a way that's tight? And again, in your workshops, I think, we just do drills. It's much like a football team that's preparing for game night on Friday. During the week, the coach will have the team running through tires. I've never seen a team run through tires in a real game, right? Mm-hmm. They're just doing drills to work on a skill set. So what I had your team and some of the amazing women from the women's side of that fence, I said, look, let's do a 3-minute drill so that I just want to hear what you would say if you had 3 minutes to close your presentation. And they were like, wow, I can't believe how much you can really get out in 3 minutes when you think it through. And that's the gift of time. But you have to have that critical awareness first, and then decide what you want to communicate. And then you have to work on it and wordsmith it. And so that's really what we're doing. If you want to be better, then you want to, figure out what your outline or your structure is. And then you're kind of inserting that outline into that structure, your persuasive arguments. Then you're complementing those arguments with a couple of stories or anecdotes. Then you're working on your time, your timing, and your delivery. I mean, if you want to level up, if it becomes a goal to level up this skill set in 2024, it's a variety of things. It's not just one thing. But that combination will be very empowering. It's exciting because then you're like, okay, now I'm getting this, and that makes a difference.
One of, as you know, Jamie here in our office is one of your biggest fans and advocates here. When we were talking about having you on for the podcast, she said, hey, make sure you have her talk about the different personalities in the room, right? A lot of times you don't think about the fact that there's a lot of different personalities in the room. You taught around the concept of ethos, pathos, and logos to really address that. Would you just walk through that, kind of what that means, and what people need to be thinking about when they are, getting ready to present to a room full of people?
Yes, and I wish I could take credit, but it wasn't me. It's Aristotle. Aristotle's rhetorical triangle. And what he said is, if you really want to persuade people, you have to understand that for an adult to kind of make that decision, that move forward, they're going to connect with you in one of three ways. Ethos, which is your ethics, credibility, trust. It's really tied to your background, your street cred, your degrees, your accomplishments, right? All of that is tied to ethos. Then there's pathos, which is heart. It's, did they connect with me? Do I like them? Did they story tell? Did I feel like I can relate to them? And then there's logos, which is logic. So do you have a logical, persuasive case? Do you have evidence and social proof? Now, when we're listening to someone, we want to know that they have that background, that credibility, the street cred, the accomplishments. We want to know that we can connect with them with heart and spirit and energy. And then, of course, there's that logical piece. We all want a little bit of all of the above. However, and this is why, and David as well, Jamie and David are both like, oh my gosh, I get this now, because we tend to present in whatever is our dominant.
Yep.
So I'm a total logos. Like, if you want to sell to me, you better lean into logic and evidence and arguments. I'm logos. David's a logos.
Yep.
Like,
Very much so.
He's logos. So if you come and you start your presentation and it's all warm and fuzzy, that's going to work with some of the people in the room, but it's not going to be my thing, right? Like, I'm not saying I don't care about it, because we all care about all three, but I'm going to lean in to logos. So my question for you, Cody, is what do you think you are? Do you think you're ethos, logos, or pathos?
Well, I would say either ethos or pathos, for sure, not logos. So
it's probably why you and David are such a great team.
It is, yeah. Yeah, we complement each other well. What are some tangible ways for people to work those three into a presentation?
Right. So let's just say you've decided you're going to do, this is a really big topic, but let's say you've got a 30-minute talk, right?
Okay.
You're like, okay, I've got 30 minutes. What am I going to accomplish? And so you know that every presentation, regardless of length, has 6 components: an introduction, 3 main points, a conclusion, and a close, right? We know this from the time we were kids.
Yep.
But utilizing that structure is key. So in the introduction, you're right, you've got to ask, how are you going to grab their attention? What is the awakening? What is going to inspire or intrigue the listener so that they want to move forward? Then you have your 3 talking points. Well, you're looking at this structure, and then you're saying, okay, logos, what's my evidence for each of those talking points? Pathos, how do I connect with heart and spirit in each of those talking points? And then ethos, how do I make sure that I tap into my credibility and our company's credibility and our organizational work that we do that shows the street cred? So you're constantly kind of weaving in a little bit of ethos, a little bit of logos, a little bit of pathos, because you don't know. Unless you really know them, you don't know what their dominant is. So it's best to have a little bit of all of the above. And then when you tie that back into your conclusion, it should have you really beautifully set up for the close, which is your specific call to action. What do you want them to do as a result of the message? And again, this is like a fire hose, mini answer to your question, but it's not a simple answer. But once you learn to do it, then it becomes like riding a bike. Now you're like, wait a minute. Okay, that formula that she just talked about, and we have that in the book, like, not to overly plug the book here, but yeah, we've designed it where we address each of the mistakes, how to solve for that mistake, what the forms and the pathways are. I've tried to make it really turnkey so that this doesn't just become like some sort of, simple, easy, like throwaway, but rather, what are the tactical, practical things that I can do to change my presentation outcomes for better results?
So much of what we've talked about, it's not really, but if people are listening to this, it probably sounds like as you're presenting to a big group of people. I think the other thing that's super applicable about this, and this is where, as you said, our advisors, they do a lot of presentations in front of groups, but they spend all day, every day in one-on-one sales presentations, right? Trying to convince someone. So when we transition to the actual sales process, so now you did a great event. The people said, I want to come in and meet with you. They're sitting in your office. What are maybe just from a mindset, how do they have to think about, like, this is also a sales presentation, right? Maybe completely different than your seminar or workshop, but what do they have to think about there? And then maybe hit just, are there some common mistakes you see being made there in that more one-on-one presentation?
Yes. So what I would do is I would probably advise that you take a page from kind of debate strategy. So before we're going to roll into any tournament as a debater, you would kind of pre-identify what your top 10 most compelling arguments are. It doesn't mean you're going to use all 10 in that round, just like you're not going to use all 10 in your meeting, but you want to have them at the ready. You want to
Mm.
have them thought through so that you can pick and choose the ones that are most relevant for that listener in that moment. And then you can pivot. So we always recommend an extemporaneous format, which is using an outline, speaking from an outline, because it allows you to be conversational while you can interject and pick and choose the things that work. But without that preparation, then you don't really have the answers to be quick and pithy and spot on. So that they can, you don't want to say, oh gosh, I forgot to cover something, because if you have those prepared, then you can customize while still being prepared, and that gives it that nice balance. But
What,
I would say start there.
yeah, one thing I think is interesting too for advisors, especially the ones we work with, are primarily working with people as they're transitioning into retirement. Those 10 things aren't really going to change at all from client to client, or prospect to prospect. It's unlike debate where you may have a different topic. These are all going to be like, you pretty much know what it's going to be, making sure their income lasts, taxes, market risk. I mean, all those things. So just preparing those and understanding what those are is maybe a little simpler, I guess is what I'm saying, is like you're going to know that coming into that.
You could have comfort in knowing they're consistent. There's a great deal, so now you're just tightening up that consistent message. That's it's a lot more fun.
Um,
Now you're pivoting probably on your illustrations of those things for that person.
So this is, and I want to talk about this kind of maybe in the more one-on-one, but obviously it would apply to, speaking to a bigger audience. But one of the mistakes that I know you talk about is dressing inappropriately or unprofessionally. Any just, we're in such a, let's say, different world than even it was like when I started in the industry, right? Where more casual, some of those things, but just any advice you have on what people should think through, like just from how they dress and the professionalism of that.
Well, we know from the research that there is a direct correlation between how people perceive you and your credibility based on the way that you speak and present, but also based on the way that you dress, allegedly within seconds that you walk in the door, right? They're looking at
Yep.
everything from, how you carry yourself to what it is that you're wearing. That being said, we could spend an hour talking about, what you should wear and how you should wear it. But I think that the simplest answer for this call would be the illustration from the late, great Paul Harvey, who is a legendary radio talk show host who is known for always wearing a suit and tie to deliver his radio show, even though no one really could ever
Hmm.
see him.
Hmm.
And in an interview with Larry King said, Paul, why do you always wear a suit and tie for your radio show? And he's like, no one can see you. And he goes, Larry, maybe no one can see me. And there was one time where I did dress down and maybe nobody else noticed, but I noticed. And I encourage people to dress up to show honor and respect for their clients' time, because we will carry ourselves differently.
Hmm.
We become different presenters when we're dressed for game day. I think it shows honor and respect for your client's time. And I think that it says, I'm ready, I'm here, I'm present. And that to me is part of the overall presentation experience, not only for you as a presenter, but also for the receiver, the listener.
It's why one of the things I've told advisors, it's probably the most common strategy or suggestion I share, is that the one thing that I've always seen help an advisor grow is when they improve their physical office. just the nicer the office, the better they're going to do. And I think it's that same application, right? People, there's just, they are judging all those things. And if they walk into, a crappy office in a rundown strip mall, and they're trusting you to manage, their life savings, it's just different than, a very nice professional office. I think it applies the same way there with, dress code, I guess, if you would say it that way.
Absolutely. And piggybacking on what you're saying, if you're presenting virtually, the same thing applies. Like, I'm fully dressed, I have my shoes on, like I dress as if I'm walking into a meeting. But even your background experience, what we know in the second phase of the study, which was entirely based on virtual presentations, is that there's a way to set up your studio. There's a way to set up your home office that allows people to see into your life. If you're predominantly presenting virtually or even in hybrid environments, your background should give people an experience as if they had walked into your real office. Like, do you have pictures on the wall like you do? Do you have pictures? Are they seeing your space? Like, this is my real office. This is not a fake background.
Yep.
And if this is your office virtually, then you should make an effort in 2024. Like, let's make an effort to have our office space virtually in hybrid, the way that we dress for a meeting, to have it be a very similar fluid experience as if they were meeting with you in person.
That's good. Okay, I want to talk. We've talked about the new book and the 12 mistakes, but your other book, Small Message, Big Impact. You talked about this earlier, kind of that game day drill the drill of like 3 minutes, trying to communicate as much as you can in 3 minutes your message. What I would say that book talks about is just the idea of concise communication, like really being able to be specific. Are there some principles from that you think advisors, even going back to that drill you were having them do in the 3 minutes, like how would they use that? How does that help them connect with prospects? Maybe even, I think advisors all the time, if you're in settings when people ask, like, what do you do? Like, how could they apply some of those principles for that?
Yeah, so interesting story about Small Message, Big Impact, because that book, really had a life of its own, and it was very exciting. But much like a lot of things in a lot of industries, even though there were some timeless principles, uh, after COVID, it couldn't be of service in the same way. And I think that a lot of your advisors are going, like, there's things that we used to do before, like pre-COVID versus where we are now, that just don't apply. So in Small Message, Big Impact, it was about crafting a clear, concise, and compelling message in a shorter period of time. So we took some of those best principles and we incorporated that into Presentation Ready, which is the new book, because Small Message, Big Impact had to go to book heaven. And like, I think that there's a lot of people that are going through this, and you and I touched on it just a little bit, but we're rolling into another new, really weird, precarious time.
Yeah.
And we have to pivot. We have to, dare we say that word? We have to change and pivot and grow. Sometimes some of the best things that we've done in our past, there's a lovely saying, sometimes you have to kill your darlings. Like, I had to be willing to let that book go to book heaven, and that forced me to lean into the new and improved and dynamic things I think that we've done, not only with the research study, but also the content for Presentation Ready, and then kept some of those best aspects moving forward. But all of this, to your point, and what Advisors Excel does, and for those of us who are in this personal and professional development space, how do we meet the need for today, and how do we watch and stay aware of where things are going so we can be better prepared? So I think, I'm grateful for the success of Small Message, Big Impact, but I believe in my heart that Presentation Ready is really the book that's going to help people moving forward.
I agree. Yeah, I mean, I don't want to say more depth, but maybe that's a good way to say it. There's definitely a lot more content there. So and this may be the question I asked before we transition into some lightning round questions.
Okay.
So we were talking about this before we started recording. 24 is going to be a very interesting year. That's the adjective I'm going to choose to use for it, right? I think we have this, the election is going to be insanity, I'm sure, just based on what the 2021 was like. Do you have any thoughts or suggestions of what, I'll say advisors, but just in general, as you're communicating, I think uncertainty, fear, just some of those things, division, polarization, all those are going to be big things in 2024. Any just maybe words of wisdom for advisors as they're presenting, whether that's in front of a group or one-on-one, of what they
Yeah.
have to be thinking about, of what that consumer is, going through right now with everything going on, and how they can maybe address or communicate more effectively in this environment.
I we all are in this environment. So here's the first thing to remember is you are not alone. We are, we are all going through it together.
Yeah.
But my focus is always the same. You know, do you stay true to you, do the work. The work is the work. So you stay focused, you stay steady, you stay consistent, and you will ride out the storm. I don't think that my plan overall changes dramatically. I'm not saying that I don't make pivots because of what's happening in the world,
Yeah.
but my through line is the same. I stay the course because whatever's happening around here, if I right my ship, if I stay consistent to my course, I will get there. Sometimes you have to make little changes, but I stay the course. And I think that gives me strength and conviction. And it also gives me peace of mind. Like I do me, like do you, do like do you, and stay consistent.
Let me ask a follow-up to that, though, maybe. Would you address some of those things? Like, would you speak to them, or would you, I don't want to say ignore or gloss over them? I mean, would you call out the fact that, like, hey, with all this going on, we know many people are, there's more uncertainty, or do you just act like it's not there?
No,
Any
I love
thoughts
that you
around
brought
that?
it up. Yeah, I think we call a thing a thing.
Okay.
Let's be transparent. And one of the things I think that I try to communicate as a consultant in the presentation skill space is to call a thing, be authentic, be truthful, be honest about where we are and where we're going and how you can be of service. And I think that that gives people a sense of comfort.
That's
It's,
good.
I mean,
Yeah.
you just did it, right? Like we could all talk about how, we don't have to be Pollyanna, but we can still be positive.
Yeah. Well, I think what you said is it's where we are, where we're going, but how you can help, right? And just focusing it back on that of like, here's the one thing that we can do in this environment, which I think is, the powerful message in this, and probably the powerful opportunity. So, okay, let me ask you some lightning round questions. These we ask at the end of every show. Just they can be quick answers, kind of whatever comes to mind. So going back to COVID, you talked about, if your book Going to Heaven and some of the things that you had to change. I think every leader has maybe rethought or had a big takeaway or lesson learned from the past few years. Is there one lesson that you've taken away from this last, stretch that you're going to carry forward for the rest of your career or life?
It's always been the same. And that's to always seek wise counsel. So I count on my mentors, the people who have been there, done that. And so whenever I hit a wall or I'm frustrated or whatever, I go to them and they could, because they've weathered so many storms before you
Yep.
that they can say, look, this too shall pass. But it was a struggle. They're and I want to learn from people who share their struggles as well as their successes. I'm not looking for a guru who has all the answers. I'm looking for somebody who is a wise and gifted counselor who can help guide me through similar decisions.
That's good. Okay, second question. What is the one thing that you did that graduated you from being good to great in your profession?
I listened. Well, so my number one mentor is Harvey McKay. He wrote Swim with the Sharks
Yeah.
without being eaten alive. He's 91 years old. He has been in my corner for years. And Harvey said this one thing, and it stuck with me, and it's changed my life, and I'm so grateful for it. And he always says, "Don't say no for another person." And I think we all, no matter where you are in your career, we can kind of go, oh, they're not going to buy into it, or they're this, they're that. And they always have these amazing opinions in our heads and what we think that they're going to do. But he says, create your best proposition based on the circumstances and let the decider decide. Don't say no for another person. And I swear it has been gold. Like it's made all different. Because I'll think to myself, they're not going to buy this. And then they go, okay. And I'm like it blows my mind.
That might be your answer to my final question too, but we're not there yet. So, okay. Third question. Is there something this year that you're doing to drive your own personal growth and development that you're excited about?
Oh gosh. Well, I always have my goal list, my things that I want
Yeah.
to accomplish. And so I look at the people who have done really well. I just follow the pattern of success. So who's doing well in this market? What have they done differently? How have they transitioned? I'm just, that's my commitment, is to just be aware of what's happening in the market. I think it's like a football team, right? When they have scouts, they go out and see what the other teams are doing. I want to know what other people are doing so that I can be ahead of the game.
Obviously, the book launch is going to keep you busy, also. So
Yeah.
that's that will be a new one. Okay, fourth question. Speaking of books, what is the one book? Can't be your own. The one
Mm.
book that you've recommended most to other entrepreneurs.
So that's easy. I actually have two, but
That's you
entrepreneurs,
can give us two if you want to. So
on the big, like if you're looking for a beast, it's Atlas Shrugged by Ayn Rand. I
yeah,
give this book away as a gift to people all the time because I think from an entrepreneurial standpoint, it really kind of gets you into a mindset of who you are and what your business does and how it serves and competitive edge. I think it's really fascinating. I'm a huge Ayn Rand fan. But on a personal level, I also give this book away all the time. Very simple.
huh.
The Richest Man in Babylon by George Clausen. Are you going to pull it out too?
It's funny. Yeah, I have some books sitting here. I have a little different colored
Look at
version,
that,
but yeah,
right? Like
yeah.
it's a simple go-to. And if you're, sometimes I think for financial advisors, sometimes you're working with people who've never had a financial advisor. And, if you kind of give them that book, it can also help get somebody into the mindset of how do you make your personal wealth grow? Or
Yep.
in the book, right? How do you start your purse to fattening, right?
Yep.
So those are my two go-tos.
Great ones. Okay. Final question. Like I said, maybe Harvey's advice he gave you, but what is the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Oh gosh, I thought about this a lot. I was looking at the pre-questions and you know, I'm um, I'm just like a normal kid. I grew up in Fountain Valley, California. So my mom and dad are like just normal people. We didn't have a ton of money. They did not attain a great deal of wealth. We were steady Eddie. Uh and I'm very grateful for my background. But once upon a time, and I wish I could tell you who it
Mhm.
was, but there was this statement, and I say it all the time to my friends whenever they're going to have a big goal or a dream or whatever. I'll say, go for it, go play big, shoot for the moon. And if you miss, you might land on a star. And so that's just kind of been my guiding light, like shoot for the moon. And even if you miss, you're most likely going to land on a star. And that's
That
really been what keeps me happy and excited and joyful. And I think if you have joy in what it is that you do, then you're on path.
Going to be pretty good. Terri, thank you for the time today. And thanks for all the time you've given to our advisors, over the last few years too. So for those who want to stay in touch with you, obviously we've promoted the book, can talk a little bit about that. Just what's the best way for them to follow you and your journey?
Yeah, so it's really easy if you just type in terrisjodin.com. You can go to my
You
website. I
might
have a,
spell the last name for them real quick, just because I know
okay,
it's not like it sounds completely.
yes, TerriSJ as in John, O as in Oscar, D as in David, I as in Indian, N as in Nancy. So terrisjodin.com. But if you're looking for a quick fix, I have a beginner level course that covers these 12 mistakes on LinkedIn Learning. So if you would prefer to just watch it, I think it's like $29 if you pay for it. But if you're a premium subscriber, it's free.
Cool.
And I would highly recommend that you watch that video or, visit the website and get on the newsletter or check out Presentation Ready. All of those things will help you to fast track your ability to course correct your presentations. And I will leave you with this. I think on some level, everyone wants to improve their presentations. They just don't know where to start. And so just whether it's the book or the video or the newsletter, all of these things will help you to get started quickly.
That's great, Terri. I appreciate the time. I know, as we said, I think this year your ability to communicate effectively is going to be very, very important. So make sure that you prioritize that. For everyone who listens to this, please share it with others. And as I say at the end, our world needs great leaders more than ever today. So go be great.